All right. This is Larry Hoy, biker writer legend, and you made it back to the First Chapter podcast, where I introduce you to some of my favorite books and I give you the first chapter for free. So, let's see what's on the agenda for today, will ya? All right. So, last week I introduced you to Bullet for Shooter. That's the first book that I wrote in the Hit World universe. So now I'm taking you right into the sequel, Demon's Kiss. We jump right back into Luther Sweetwater, the rookie. He's got a little bit more time, and it's going to get a lot more crazy. So let's look at Demon's Kiss. All right, checking out the back page. Barely healed from his last adventure, Life Enders Incorporated rookie shooter Luther Sweetwater returns home, only to be offered a job at the barrel of a gun, an offer he literally can't refuse. And he's off again. The target this time, he needs to find and eliminate, with extreme prejudice, the person or people who have stolen a Memphis police captain's niece. With the help of Terry, his partner, and a potential girlfriend, he begins the hunt. But when the trail leads them south of the border, they quickly determine that it's more than a random kidnapping. An international kidnapping and sex slave ring is involved. Worse, LEI shooters aren't welcome in Mexico, and the Mexican authorities actively hunt LEI shooters operating within their borders. As things spiral out of control, Sweetwater goes from being the hunter to the hunted when the leaders of the cartel decide to put an end to his interference once and for all. Can Sweetwater and Terry save the women who've been stolen by the cartel, or will they meet an untimely end at the hands of supernatural beings waiting for them? Let's see what's inside the first chapter. All right, we're going to start in the prologue today. Maria watched as the old Hispanic man walked the woman into the room. He took her to the last alcove and cuffed her arms through iron rings high in the wall. When he cinched the cuff closed on her wrist, she sagged from exhaustion. The cuff bit into her wrist, but she didn't even seem to be aware. The old man walked down the line of women, giving a tug to their arms, checking his work. Satisfied they were secure, he stepped back and waited for instructions. From the shadows, Maria asked the old man, "Who do you serve?" "To Madre." Maria smiled when he called her the mother. That was new, but this is not inaccurate. She was about to give him a second life. "What gift do you offer?" "Estas muchachas." "No," she corrected him. "The women are not the gift, they are the price. I expect your life. I'll make you young and strong. You will serve me forever." "Si, si." He bowed his head and folded his hands. "My life." He said the words slowly, as if he'd been practicing. She stepped away from the wall to join the man in the middle of the room. Dark silk kimono enhanced her pale, ageless Asian features. With the touch of a lover, she removed the old man's shirt. His dark, leathery skin was cut with deep wrinkles that must have come from decades of hard work in the fields. "My life," he said again. His eyes were pleading. "Yes." She kissed him. He froze, clearly not ready for the embrace. He reached out and took her in his arms, but it wasn't clear whether the embrace was for passion or support. Maria broke the embrace with a smile. She stepped back and removed her kimono, folding it carefully and setting it on a table by the wall. Her naked body seemed to glow in the candlelight room. From the table, she picked up a dark-bladed dagger. She held the blade against her chest as she approached the women chained against the wall. The nearest woman hung limply from her handcuffs. Maria could smell the blood pulsing in her veins. Even if the woman was dead, it wouldn't stop the conjuration, not once it started. With a long slice, she cut away the woman's shirt. She whispered a word of power and ran the blade across the woman's neck. She came awake, blinking in shock. She opened her mouth to scream, but the knife had cut into her neck and slicing her throat almost to the spine. She spasmed, shaking in the cuffs. It was the only sound she made as she died. Blood sprayed from the severed neck, coating Maria and spraying to the floor. Maria's eyes glowed bright red as she lunged at the dying woman. She pressed against the woman's neck and sucked at the blood. After she drained the body, her belly was swollen as if she'd finished a large Thanksgiving dinner. She advanced on the second woman, and as before, she cut away the woman's blouse. The woman was unresponsive, only twitching a bit when Maria opened her throat. After she drained the second body, Maria resembled a very pregnant woman. She moved to the third. When Maria cut away the woman's clothes, she stirred awake. Her eyes went wide and she screamed, turning and twisting, but anchored by her cuffs into the iron ring. She could do little more than spin in the alcove. Maria stood before the woman, naked but covered in blood. She licked the blood from the dagger while she reveled in the woman's terror. She took as much from the fear as she did from the blood. "Please don't do this," the woman pleaded. I don't want to die." Maria grabbed a handful of her hair and twisted her head to the side. The woman shrieked in pain, and Maria kissed her. The woman tried to pull away, but Maria pinned her against the wall. She forced the other woman's mouth open. Maria reached into her mouth with a serpent's tongue and pulled the woman's tongue into her own mouth. And Maria bit it off and swallowed. The woman twisted and squirmed in Maria's embrace, all the while choking on her own blood. Maria clamped her mouth over the other woman and pulled the blood from her mouth. They stood together, embraced in the last kiss, until the woman grew too weak to fight. Then Maria opened her throat with the knife and finished the process. Maria's stomach was grossly extended, the skin of her abdomen black from a belly full of blood. She returned to the old man, who was still standing in the middle of the room. She approached him with a slow waddle. "Who do you serve?" she asked him again. His jaw fell open, but he was unable to speak. The horror of what he'd just witnessed prevented him from saying anything. "What gift do you offer?" She cooed as blood dripped from her mouth. The man put his hands up to keep Maria away, even though he was frozen to the spot. "Oh, it's much too late for that." She grabbed the side of his head and brought his mouth to her own, their lips nearly touching. Maria chanted more words of power, words that were unknown to mortals, words of evil, and then she embraced him and completed her spell with a kiss. She sent the blood into his belly. The liquid ate away at his internal organs, replacing them with new, thick black blood. Over the next hour, she fed him from her mouth, like a baby bird with its mother. And when the man was fed, his body grew stronger, his face grew younger, and his heart was turned to her. When the sun rose the following day, the transformation was complete. The man who woke on the floor resembled someone half his former age. Maria stood, pulling him to his feet. "Who do you serve?" she asked him again. He knelt before her and kissed her toes. "Tu madre, tu madre, tu madre." And now, Chapter 1. Steph could feel the bass of the dance floor thumping as she climbed the stairs to the Beale Street Club. "This is fantastic!" she yelled back to Jennifer. She glanced back when Jen tapped her on the shoulder. Her friend was cupping a hand to her ear. "What?" she said through a grin. "Come on!" She took her friend's hand and pulled her up the last few steps. Just inside the door, a large black man in a polo shirt sat on the stool. "Yo, man, go grab me something to drink, would you?" He asked someone standing behind him. And then, "ID," he said, holding out his hand to the women. Steph reached into her low-cut top of her dress to pull a driver's license from her bra, the bouncer's eyes following her hand. With her other hand, she pulled the top of her dress to the side, just enough to expose the thin lace trim of the bra underneath. With a half grin, she passed the bouncer her new ID. She'd had it fixed to show a birth date 3 years earlier, magically moving her from 18 to legal drinking age. A broad smile stretched across the man's face, and he gave her a wink. Yours? He nodded to Jennifer. She pulled her altered ID from her bra too, but she did it without the extra show. The bouncer glanced at the license and passed them back. You girls have a nice evening. He pressed a rubber stamp to the back of their hands. A green smiley face completed their ensemble. Steph returned with a wink, and they both took their IDs. Thanks, she smiled, and the girls walked in. Smoke drifted down from the ceiling vents to give the club a hazy look. Dozens of lights spun and danced across the floor. Jen yelled something beside her, but the music made it nearly impossible to hear inside the club. What? I can't believe you did that, her friend yelled in her ear. Oh, it's a little show. They don't even look at the ID card. Steph spun around to face her friend. This time she pulled the neckline even lower, exposing her entire breast. A thin black lace did little to hide her, even in the smoky room. She licked her lips as she eased the ID back into its original position. With her patented half grin, she looked like she'd practiced in the mirror for hours. She adjusted her dress, smoothing it over her chest. Over Jen's shoulder, she spotted the bouncer at the door, staring. He must have watched the whole show. She wasn't sure whether she felt embarrassed or not. With a final wink at the bouncer, she grabbed her friend's arm and pulled her deeper into the crowd. You're going to get us arrested, Jen yelled in Steph's ear, whipping her in a tight hug. I don't know how you can do that. The girls moved to the edge of the dance floor. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and too much cologne. Steph loved it. The chaos of the lights, the sound, it called to her. Side by side, they moved along the dance floor, hips swaying with the music. The girls sang and laughed and danced together. A few men tried to cut in, but a simple shake of their head and the men moved along looking for a new catch. It was an hour before either of the girls tired. When the music slowed, Steph noticed a group of young men watching them from a nearby table. I think those guys are stalking us, she yelled in Jennifer's ear, and then nodded to the men at the table. Jennifer looked back and shook her head, sweat beading along her face. Steph, intimidated, taking a drink from an invisible cup. This time her friend nodded. Steph grabbed Jen's arm and pulled her. Jen spun around and fell into Steph's arms. From there, the two girls danced their way towards the bar. The bartender, a skinny guy with his shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, nodded to them. Steph pointed to a repurposed 7-Eleven slushy machine that was rolling some red concoction. Jen held up 2 fingers. The bartender set a pair of plastic cups filled with the slushy mix and leaned towards the girl and called out over the noise, I need your driver's license to start a tab. Steph reached for her chest to remove her updated ID, only to be stopped by her friend's hand on her arm. Let's use mine. Steph watched as her friend teased the driver's license from her own bra. Jennifer hooked a finger in the cleavage of her dress and pulled it down just an inch. The corner of her ID slipped out of her dress. She pinched the corner and pulled it free. She winked at the bartender and passed it over. So what was that? Steph pointed a finger and scowled at her, only to burst out laughing seconds later. Yeah, I'm not as good as you are. Practice, Steph yelled in her ear. The two girls laughed together. With drinks in their hands, they swayed back to the dance floor. Sweat was dripping from the side of Steph's cup as she moved around the floor. She took a sip of the drink and loved the fruity-flavored ice mix. She was unsure whether it was the cold or the sweet, but the first cup drained away in an instant. She just swallowed it the last bit. A second plastic cup appeared in her hand. She looked into the dark eyes of a man she hadn't seen before. He was a little older than she was. Well, he had to be. She was drinking on a fake ID. He was also fine and tall, and she was only eye level with his chest. His shoulders were massive. It reminded her of those superhero movies where all the guys are jacked. She took a sip of her drink, grabbed him by the shirt collar, and pulled his face low. When he was within reach, she kissed him, a quick, simple peck on the lips. She laughed at as his face lit up in shock, clearly not expecting a kiss. She waved at him and backed away, smiling. Steph glanced around, looking for her friend. After a few seconds, she spotted Jennifer, who was also dancing with a man, fresh cup in her hand. The man she'd kissed was back. He took her arm and slowly spun her around. When her back was to him, he slipped in behind her, wrapped his free hand around her waist, and pulled her tight against him, and smashed the movement of her hips into his own. Steph loved the feel of his body against her. His hands were so graceful, they seemed to dance along her body. She twisted, bringing his chest close to her face. His scent was as lovely as his face. She danced in his arms, turning to sip and press against him. She took a sip from the cup, only to find it nearly empty. Before the song ended, a fresh cup appeared in her hand. There might have been more. She wasn't sure. The song ended to a blur. Together, she danced with him, with the handsome man. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulled his face close to her, and kissed him. Not a quick peck this time. She gave herself to him, pressing against his body as their tongues danced. She came away licking her lips, thinking, "He tastes like walnuts." Her body was swaying again. They were dancing. His hands drifted along her. Everywhere he touched, her body grew warm in response. She curled against him as his hands found the small of her back and then her bottom. She might have groaned when he squeezed her. Then she tasted the walnuts again. The music didn't seem as loud. She felt like she was dancing on a cloud of cotton candy, and it was warm, like her bed at home. She let her eyelids droop closed as she snuggled against the man dancing with her. He was soft, like a teddy bear. Then the floor tilted under her. Her eyes snapped open, but she wasn't in her bed. Was she in a nightclub? How did she get here? She blinked around her, but her eyelids didn't open. Everything seemed to have grown heavy. When she was finally forced her eyes open, she was looking into the face of a man she didn't recognize. The world around her was suddenly cold. She could see the stars up in the sky. The strange man scooped her up, her legs cradled in his arms. She thought about Jennifer, but she was so tired. She curled against the man's chest with a sigh and drifted off to sleep. All right, that's all I'm giving you today. But this is The Demon's Kiss. This is the newest book in the Hit World series. We're opening up a couple new books later this year, but this is the one you should get right now. Anyway, I'll see you next week back here on First Chapter. Hey, I hope you liked today's First Chapter novel. I'll see you next week. I try to get these out about once a week. Anyway, if you're an author and you think your book would be a great match for this podcast, reach out to me. I'm at Larry Hoy Author, boom, 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 on Facebook. And if you're a reader and you want to check out a great book series, Hit World, the Red Label set. Bullet for Shooter, Demon's Kiss, they're out there on Amazon. You can't miss them. But right now, I am your author, biker, writer, legend, Larry Hoy. Find me on Facebook, Larry Hoy Author, or you've got my YouTube channel. Just ring down there and subscribe. Anyway, I'll see you next week right here on First Chapter Podcast. Bye.